Hello and welcome to Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. I'm Brandi, Kruse. Well, it's about the dumbest tax that Democrats could float, and of course they're going to do it because nothing's standing in their way. They have full control in Olympia. They have for quite some time. They just increased their majorities in the 2024 session. They had voters who declined to repeal some of their major taxes, and so they think, well, full steam ahead. So we already know states facing about $10 to $12 billion budget deficit, although it sounds like it could be more like $14 billion. And it was totally hidden from voters until after the election. And there's obvious reasons why. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, we were doing great. Our budget was fine. And now we've got this massive, maybe $14 billion budget deficit. So, I guess we got to increase taxes. I guess we can't go around and cut spending. So they've already hinted at a couple things they might do that we've talked about on the show. But just as a reminder, one of the things they might do, because they said the rich and businesses, that's where they're going to focus their money hungry on. So the Seattle's high-paying jobs tax, which was basically a tax on Amazon, they are going to look at doing that statewide for sure. And then I really think expanding the tax on capital gains. Voters declined to repeal the tax on capital gains. And so when all is said and done, it's no longer going to be a tax on just the wealthiest of the wealthy, like the Jeff Bezos types. No, they're going to reduce it. And I think eventually over the years, they'll make it apply to the sale of your primary home. So all of that kind of expected. What I did not expect is for them to be ballsy enough to propose doing a tax on unrealized capital gains, which is essentially just a tax on having money. Here is a clip from Fox 13 News.
We have a complete exemption of intangible property, like stocks and bonds, from the property tax. So that's something worth considering.
The idea of a wealth tax isn't new. Last year, a Senate version of one bill had 19 senators sponsoring it. It's also something similar to what Kamala Harris reportedly supported during the campaign trail. But Representative Chris Corey calling the measure, quote, an insane idea. He says taxing stocks every year that fluctuates in value makes no sense. Corey says taxing items before they are even sold, essentially taxing unrealized gains, would drive innovators and investors out of Washington long term. But Peterson says there is a clear appetite by Washingtonians to tax the ultra rich. He points to voters refusing to support Initiative 2109, which would have killed the 7% capital gains tax in our state.
And supported additional taxes to pay for more robust services.
Good God. I mean, good God, they have no shame. And that was kind of a creepy smile from Senator Jamie Peterson. He's like, yes, we can do whatever we want. This would be the nail in our state's economic coffin if they decide to pursue this. And think about that. So the way they justify it is like, hey, you've got a house, it's property, you're taxed on your property. So if you're someone who's got stocks and bonds, even if you haven't sold it and realized the gain on the sale of those stocks and bonds, you're holding them. And so we're going to tax you on that intangible property, essentially. It's absolutely nuts. I mean, this is as fringe as you get when it comes to tax policy. But as Hannah Kim pointed out in her story there at Fox 13, this idea of a wealth tax is something that Democrats in Olympia tried to push this past legislative session. Now, it didn't get anywhere, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to resuscitate it in its old form. So we know essentially what this would look like. What they proposed is Senate Bill 5486. Again, this is from the 2023 legislative session. Originally, that's where it originated. And I just want to read some of this to you because it just lays out their mindset. It's fascinating to me when they craft these bills. They use it as this like bully pulpit to share within the framework of this bill their disappointment with our tax code and their left-wing ideology. It says, an act relating to investing in Washington families and creating a more fair tax system by enacting a narrowly tailored property tax on extreme wealth derived from the ownership of stocks, bonds, and other financial intangible property. It says Washington, this is literally in the framework of the bill, it's insane. Washington has long led the way with innovative and bold ideas that have changed the world. Many of the world's greatest wealthiest innovators and artists, engineers and entrepreneurs and scientists and social activists have called Washington home. But Washington's status as an economic and social leader is threatened by growing wealth inequality and a tax structure that perpetrates it. Asking the state's poorest residents to pay 6 times more in taxes as a share of their income than the state's highest income households, including some of its wealthiest individuals in the world, is unconscionable. A property tax on ownership, therefore, the legislature finds that in order to modernize Washington's tax code and make it more fair and balanced, a property tax on ownership should be extended to a class of assets, financial intangible property, that is exempted from the Washington tax code today. So we have to do this. Makes it more fair and equitable, not for the people who hold stocks and bonds, and you want to literally tax them for owning stock, just owning stocks and bonds. Not even selling it like our current capital gains tax, a tax on unrealized capital gains, a tax on having the audacity to, be successful or plan, invest in stocks and bonds. We're going to tax you every single year for that. So a few things. It's a wild policy that will spell economic disaster for the state of Washington, because you're talking about that on top of our existing tax on capital gains. So you're taxing the rich, you're taxing entrepreneurs, you're taxing business owners when they sell things like stocks and bonds and other assets. And then you're going to tax them even when they don't sell it, even when they're holding on to it. You think anyone's going to come here and start a business? You think anyone's going to come here and be an entrepreneur, be involved in tech? Remember, tech workers, a lot of their income, their actual portfolio for what they accept for a job isn't just tangible money, isn't just their salary, it's stocks in the company that they're working for. So now just holding on to those, they'd be subjected to taxes. You think all the tech opportunities that are growing in Texas and Florida, you think they're going to come to Seattle where they're going to get taxed when they hold on to their stocks and they're going to get taxed when they sell their stocks? That's insane. It will be economic ruin for the state of Washington. And going back to the wording in that bill that was first proposed in 2023. All their hand-wringing and complaints over our tax code and how it's crushing the working class. Who's been in power for 40 years? Who's been in power for 40 years and has fostered a tax and spend environment that is crushing the working class? You crush them more and more with taxes every single year. You crush them by taking money out of their paycheck for the long-term care program that nobody even freaking wants. You gave them a little window to opt out of it. You crush them with the Climate Commitment Act, because who pays the most for the Climate Commitment Act? Poor people, middle-class people at the gas pump. They're paying just as much for the increase in gas prices and energy prices as someone who's worth $50 million is. Because when you go and you both fill up your tank, you're both paying those higher gas prices, but it accounts for a much larger percentage of the income of a poor person or middle-class person than it does a rich person. So you add on all of these increased taxes over the years, and then you complain that the middle class and the lower class has to pay too many taxes. And you'll keep going back to, of course, all of this is designed to get an income tax. That's what they want. They want an income tax at any cost, even though in Washington state, a long time ago, we decided we're a state without an income tax. But here's the thing. Look, God, do I want to say that? It's almost to the point where it's like, okay, I'll support an income tax, but you have to get rid of every other tax that you say is regressive. But they won't do that. They do an income tax on top of everything else. So they complain, again, about how bad the tax code is and how overtaxed the middle class and lower class are. So that's why we have to. They never say, when they want to tax the rich, they never say we're going to tax the rich and reduce taxes for the poor and middle class. They never take it out, right? Okay, we're going to get $300 million in revenue from the tax on capital gains, from taxing the likes of Jeff Bezos and all his other rich buddies. And then we're going to take that $300 million and we're going to use it to offset taxes we would have collected that have a much more profound impact on the lower class and the middle class, like the sales tax, like the gas tax. They never do that. They act so righteous, like we're taxing the rich, we're taxing big businesses. And then they just hope that you don't realize that your taxes didn't get better. Your taxes didn't go down. They're hoping, what was they said that the state's poorest residents pay 6 times more in taxes as a share of their income than the state's highest income households. And that's because, again, like I said, you go to the store, you buy groceries, The rich person's paying the same amount for those groceries and the same tax for those groceries, and that tax amount accounts for a much smaller portion of a rich person's income. So that's why they call it regressive or whatever it is. But they don't want to bring it down like, hey, let's try to bring down the tax burden so everybody has the same tax burden, right? Like I said, everybody's got the same percentage of their income, right? No, they want to make rich people pay more. And so it might not turn out that lower income people are paying 6 times more, but you're still going to be paying the same amount. It might just not be 6 times more anymore because they added taxes for the wealthy. They didn't help you at all. This doesn't help you at all. This is, well, they want to do a wealth tax. Oh my God, this legislative session is going to be insane. And again, I'm half tempted to just let them do it. Not that it's up to me, but to just not stand in their way, not talk about how crazy it is. Let them do this. Let them pass that stupid bill that would make being homeless a protected class of people. And let's just watch Washington State dive to depths that San Francisco hasn't even thought of in its worst nightmares. And then see if we can get people to wake up. So we're going to be talking much more about this. If they're truly serious about it, that will have such wide-ranging implications. And I would say to the Seattle business community, you asked for it. You asked for it. Amazon, Seattle business community, you supported the CCA, you opposed the repeal of other taxes that weren't directly impacting you because you wanted to appear progressive or whatever it is. This is what happens when you do that. You signed off on a tax and spend and waste atmosphere. You didn't push back against other taxes to say, hey, you've got enough money, you need to spend it wisely. And maybe you did that thinking that they'd get off your back. Of course, they're not going to get off your back. So I don't even feel bad if this happens for the Seattle business community. I don't even feel bad if this happens for Amazon, because you absolutely made your bed and you're going to lay in it, but you refuse to fight back with other people who were impacted by the policies they were pushing through when you had the opportunity to do it. And now this is going to happen to you. All right. So speaking of taxes, Bob Ferguson is still acting like the world's best moderate. I just don't know when he's going to drop it. So for those of you who've lived in Washington State long enough, you'll remember when Jay Inslee first ran for governor 12 years ago, and he ran as a moderate too. And I would say Washington Democrats were far more moderate at the time. But for instance, he ran saying he wasn't going to raise taxes. Remember? And that lie lasted all of 1 year. So I don't know if Bob Ferguson's charade is going to be able to keep up for more than Jay Inslee's did, but he sure acted like it. So he did this wide-ranging interview with the Seattle Times. And in it, I mean, he literally sounds, if this is actually who he was and who he'd always been, I wouldn't have that big of a problem with Bob Ferguson. He's totally pretending to be a different person. So the headline, Governor-elect Bob Ferguson's early approach to fix Washington's $10 billion budget deficit. So they sat down with him, talked to him for an hour about basically what's coming up in the legislative session and how he would contend or will have to contend with this budget deficit. It says, Governor-elect Bob Ferguson says he's not ready to back tax increases just yet. He said, we're looking at savings, efficiencies, how we can do better as a state. That's the first, second, and third conversation, as far as I'm concerned, before even entertaining anything else. Oh, that sounds great. That sounds great. He says we need to look for cuts and efficiencies before we even entertain new tax increases. I mean, never mind that when Bob Ferguson was on the King County Council, he signed off on $1 billion in new taxes. So he's not a fiscal conservative. He's pretending to be a fiscal conservative because that's what he ran as. Remember one of his first ads talking about the crushing costs for families. So can he really turn around 2 months later and be like, new taxes for everyone? So it's a facade. It's a charade. I don't know how long he's going to keep it up, but that's not who he is. And then it goes on to talk about some other priorities that Democrats have pushed in the past, some really fringe stuff, and whether he'd support it. Again, non-committal. It says Ferguson was also non-committal on some top legislative priorities of progressive Democrats and their allies, which may wind up on his desk for a signature or veto in the next several months. That includes a bill giving striking workers access to unemployment benefits, which passed in the State House last year. So he's playing coy with the Seattle Times on this. You really freaking think that if a Democratic governor gets a bill to his desk that would pay striking workers, so a bill backed by unions, which are the primary donors to every Democrat in the state of Washington, which absolutely hold the purse strings and guard the gate to the governor's office, you really think Bob Ferguson would veto it? I love that the Seattle Times is even entertaining the idea that Bob Ferguson would veto a bill that came to his desk to pay striking workers. Like, they're totally buying his moderate game of pretend, hook, line, and sinker. And then it says, oh God, okay, what's the other fringe policy that didn't make it across the finish line last year? Rent control, right? Okay, where's he on that? Similarly, Ferguson didn't commit in the interview to supporting a bill to cap annual rent increases. Shocking. Won't commit to that either. Another proposal that passed the state house last year but died the Senate. However, he has directed his transition team's housing subcommittee to come up with a recommendation on a, quote, balanced law that prohibits predatory rent increases. So rent control. So he's like, no, I can't say for sure whether I'm going to do that. But he's told his subcommittee on housing to come up with a recommendation for a law that prohibits predatory rent increases. So yeah, again, still playing coy. Here's the one that really floored me, right? Ferguson said he has no problem with deportations of individuals who are criminals under existing policies and law, and acknowledged the president has broad legal authority on immigration, but he said he's preparing for if Trump pushes past legal boundaries. So here's the guy who sued the Trump administration 100 times, who we're supposed, and one of those was for the kids in cages lie, and we're supposed to believe he has no problem with deportations of individuals who are criminals under existing policy and law. That would be everyone who's in the country illegally, right? Because you're a criminal if you're in the country illegally. You committed a violation. So Bob Ferguson is really saying he has no problem if Trump comes in door to door and deports illegal immigrants in our state? Of course he does. Of course he would absolutely have the state sue over it in seconds. Like, he has whole aspects of his transition team that are dedicated to fighting against Donald Trump preemptively. So it's like this whole moderate thing is hilarious to me, this like act that he's portraying, and the Seattle Times just goes with it. Like, no pushback to, hey, you know, you say that you're kind of skeptical about raising taxes, but you raised taxes $1 billion while you were on the King County Council. While you were the Attorney General, you literally doubled the size of your office, which of course doubled costs for Washingtonians. And now you want to act like a fiscal conservative? Don't you think that would be the job of a journalist? It was also like, gag. They say that he came in and he sat down for an hour-long interview with no entourage. They literally say that in the Seattle Times article. He had no entourage with him. Like, oh, how big of him. Oh my God. He's a man of the people.
Oh, yeah.
He is a man of the people. But all of these things, again, on the union thing, don't you think a good journalist would push back on the assertion that Bob Ferguson would even consider vetoing a bill that was being pushed by the unions, that made it to his desk, that passed both the House and the Senate? Not in a million years. And journalists think it's not their job to say that. Yeah, it is. It's your job so your readers know what's realistic and not realistic. Like, Bob Ferguson says this, however, here's how much money he got from unions. Here's how much money he got from unions in his run for the governor's office. You know, Bob says this about new taxes, except here's what he did when he was on the King County Council and in the Attorney General's office. That's journalism. This is stenography. This is shameful stenography. So yeah, Bob Ferguson, you're not a moderate. We see you. We see you for what you really are. It'll only be a matter of time before you reveal your true self. All right, coming on up next, Jay Inslee, sadly, has put cold water on the rumors that he's going to move to Idaho. But do we believe him? If you're thinking about selling your home at some point this year, I think people are a little hesitant to put their homes on the market because of the economy. Wes Jones was telling us that home sales are like reaching near lows. And so it's really important that if you decide to make that decision and sell your home, you have the right real estate agent in your corner. And we happen to believe that that's Wes Jones.
You know, I'm hearing a lot of things. People are, oh gosh, well, you know, there might be a recession coming up. I'm like, hey guys, anybody working in real estate has been living it for like the last 30 months or so. It's a strange conundrum though, because sales are low, but prices are still very, very high. you can still sell and you can plan on making a lot of money, but you might have to prepare your home a little bit harder and do a little bit more work than you have in the past because buyers are a little bit, less forgiving.
Yeah, and Wes and his team have an awesome marketing strategy to make sure that your listing looks fantastic, that it's ready to hit the market. They can help you with cosmetic repairs or updates, and he can even help you pay for that up front with their Listing Boost concierge service. So check out Wes Jones, sellwithwes.com, sellwithwes.com, a better way to sell your home. All right, so these rumors started popping up, 6-8 months ago or something? Yeah, that Jay Inslee might be retiring to Idaho. Which I had mixed reactions to because I'm like, oh no, sir, you will live with what you've created here. It should be mandated that if you're the governor, you must live out your days
the rich,
here,
you better be
right?
one of them.
Yeah. But then I was like, good riddance, kind of. But then I kind of felt bad because, what did Idaho ever do to us? So it's just all over the place. But it first came from the Idaho Tribune. They put out, we have begun hearing rumors that Washington Governor Jay Inslee has acquired a retirement property in Hayden Lake, Idaho. Is Governor Inslee the man who presided over vaccinations, disastrous Antifa riots, and the anarchist zones like CHOP welcomed in Idaho? I mean, the answer is, of course, no. But that rumor kind of persisted, and I think we had talked about the rumor on our show, and then it kind of died down for a while. And then Ari Hoffman was on Newsmax yesterday or the day before, and he was joking about Jay Inslee may be moving to Idaho. And I think that's what prompted this from Jay Inslee. So he takes to X and he says, oh, this cracks me up. Disreputable right-wing media don't usually get under my skin. But that is the case when they suggest I have plans to move to Idaho after I leave office. Washington already has the best potatoes anyway. Oh, got him there.
Hilarious.
Oh my God, he's such an old man. His little dad jokes. So that makes it sound like he says he's not moving to Idaho. And he says disreputable right-wing media, doesn't usually get under my skin. But when they say I'm leaving my state and the best potatoes in the nation behind, well, that just bothers me. So I'm like, okay, for any other person, that would be the end of the story. For any other person, that would be the end of the story. I'd be like, well, he says he's not moving to Idaho, so he must not be. But we're not talking about any other person. We're talking about, speaking of disreputable, one of the most disreputable politicians in the country.
At what point are you going to tell the people of Washington State that they're going to possibly see much higher gas prices next year because of the CO2 emissions tax?
Well, that's not true. They are not going to see much higher gas prices, maybe even lower than they are today. This is going to have minimal impact, if any, pennies. We're talking about pennies. Potentially.
Are you trying to bribe voters with this?
No, they're trying to take away $200 from these families. Who wants to take away $200 credit from a family to help them with their costs of these low-income folks? That's reprehensible. You know what else? It's weird.
Governor, I'd like to ask you about what's going on in Seattle. There's this thing called the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. What's your thought on that? The fact that the protesters have taken that over and not allowing people to come and go freely? Regarding the National Guard.
Well, that's news to me, so I'll have to reserve any comment about it. I have not heard anything about that.
What should voters make of the fact that you were apparently oblivious to police abandoning an entire precinct in the state's largest city? You have 1 minute, 15 seconds.
Yeah, well, listen, if you look at the facts of that situation, I could not have been oblivious to it because I actually deployed the Washington State National Guard.
Sir, then why do you say you did not know about it?
You'll have to go back and look at some quote. I can't comment on the quote right now.
This is news to me. You went on to say, I haven't heard about it from any credible source nearly 2 days after CHOP happened. You're now saying you did know about CHOP.
Listen, I can't tell you. I knew about CHOP. That's why we had state troopers ready to respond at the city's request.
Yeah. So Jay Inslee is the definition of disreputable, so you'll forgive me if I don't quite believe him when he says he's not moving to Idaho. All right, Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell.
Faces during that interview
what?
Or that question, your face is great. Just went, what, Jay?
Jay Inslee, give me a break. All right, Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell says he's running for re-election. I have thoughts, obviously, or I wouldn't talk about it on the show. I don't think you're going to like my thoughts very much, but here we go anyway. So he sent out a statement saying, continuing to make progress for you and our city. He said, during my first term, we've made real progress and put our One Seattle approach into action, advancing our shared priorities by uniting the people of our city together around common values. We've delivered public safety solutions, kept parks and sidewalks open and accessible while moving people into shelter and housing with services, made historic investments in affordable housing, prioritized a transportation system focused on safety, and passed nation-leading climate legislation. But there is more work to do. This is the time for proven leadership to stand up for our values and keep Seattle moving forward as a city that is welcoming, affordable, and safe. There's only one thing in that entire statement I agree with, and it is when he said there is more work to do. There is much more work to do. The question is he the guy to do it? You know, when he wants to act as if we've made some sort of significant strides on homelessness or crime or affordability or anything, that's just a fantasy. That hasn't happened, and he hasn't made it happen as the mayor. So that being said, I don't think Seattle can do better than Bruce Harrell right now. That's the truth. So the way that these mayoral elections always go is you have, obviously, you know, Democrats. You have a Democrat who's running kind of closer to the middle, and you have a far left fringe lunatic crazy. That was the case with Nikita Oliver. That was the case for Lorena Gonzalez. Both of them lost. Nikita Oliver lost to Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin, who was considered to be a little more moderate. And then, of course, Bruce Harrell beat Lorena Gonzalez, who is like a police defunder type. So that is going to be the case here as well. I don't think you'll have anyone who's similar to Bruce Harrell in terms of being a little bit more moderate of a Democrat who challenges him. That's sort of untoward. It's not, it's frowned upon in the political scene. So that means his challenger is going to be someone very, very far to the left. And that's obviously not someone who I would be willing to support, or who, frankly, a lot of Democrats who've sort of woken up to how toxic that is might be willing to support. And so Bruce Harrell is the best that Seattle's going to do for the next 4 years, unfortunately. I think all that we can hope is that he continues to say the right things, but it has to be more than that. That's the problem with Bruce Harrell, is that he talks a lot about doing stuff, and he does stuff less. So I can talk and say I'll do a million things, like, oh, blah, 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 and then the outcomes aren't there. So talking is great. I was very complimentary of him up front because he was saying things that other Seattle leaders had to that point not been willing to say about how bad the crime crisis was, about we need to support police officers. We can't let people set up tents in parks where kids are playing, etc. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing entirely to do it. And he just hasn't done it. You know, you look at some of the cleanups they've done in some of the hardest hit areas of the drug crisis, it'll be good for 2 days. And then it'll be back to how it is. Or, you know, you got the MLB All-Star game. So you sweep the encampments out of the area. That's not fixing anything. Like, you do realize that, right? You didn't fix it if you just move the encampments out of the area around the stadium and push them into SoDo, right? So that's the problem. Bruce Harrell is not the mayor that Seattle needs. I think he's shown that, but he's the only option we have for the time being. So I hope that in 4 years, I think he'll run. I think he'll win again. I hope that in 4 years, Seattle can get a mayor who not only says the right things, but also does the right things. So that's my thoughts on Bruce Harrell. I mean, we'll continue to hold him accountable for a lack of effective action, but it's very unlikely that I'm going to be more supportive of whoever his opponent ends up being. It's going to be some cuckoo nutcase. I'm trying to think of who. Tammy Morales? It's Tammy Morales, who just resigned from the city council.
She'll get bored.
Gonna run. I mean, remember Shama Sawant said she regretted leaving the Seattle City Council? So maybe Shama Sawant tries to make a comeback.
Oh, scary.
It's going to be someone totally cuckoo, so we're going to have to focus on them and all the dumb stuff they stand for and say. So Bruce Harrell will get basically a free pass. I mean, but I'm like, it's just disappointing. It's disappointing that these are the options. It's like, okay, he's not what Seattle needs, but it's the best we're going to do. Am I wrong?
No, I don't think you're wrong. I hope that he, accomplishes more in the next run. And then maybe when he decides that this will be his last one, maybe he'll actually get something done. And
there's always that, what about the electoral consequences, right? But I don't feel like he had or faced, leading up to this year, real electoral consequences, right? Because that's been the vibe in Seattle, and the shift on the city council was in his favor. So he should have gone all in and like, we're absolutely going to do all of these things. And I'm not saying he doesn't want to do those things. I'm saying I think he likes being mayor more than he likes being mayor. I think he likes
the job,
the title, more than he likes the job.
Yeah.
And that's not, Seattle needs a workhorse. Seattle needs an absolute workhorse who's going to get things done. Whatever is said about them be damned. And that's not him. He's proven that. So
maybe as the council kind of shifts, maybe now that it has shifted quite a bit, maybe it will be his opportunity to get more done that makes sense. I don't know. It keeps shifting. So as it keeps shifting and he keeps getting a little more support that way, maybe
he has enough to get it done now. And they just they're just not doing things at the pace that they need to be done.
Right.
You know what?
And you're just pushing things around, like the homeless, like the drugs and stuff. They're just pushing it around.
Oh yeah. You know though when things will get much better.
What?
Much better. Roughly 2026, kind of around World Cup time.
Oh yeah.
Somewhere in there. Then we'll see an awakening.
Right.
It'll be great.
Yeah,
all right. So it is the time of the year where we start getting stupid gifts from Olympia in the form of pre-filed bills. So legislators start to file the bills that they intend to run this upcoming legislative session. So several dozen have been filed so far. And as usual, a few of them are just totally worthless waste of time. Let's talk about it in our segment, Unbelievable. All right, how dumb can we get? So lawmakers in Olympia have a ton on their plate, right? They have to be laser focused on the budgetary situation that they're in, hopefully on trying to find ways to improve efficiencies and reduce spending and jobs if necessary, or like is what's likely to happen, new ways to take your money. But either way, they got a lot to do. They certainly don't have time to be introducing something like House Bill 1017, which is an act designated to creating a kimchi day in the state of Washington. Mm-hmm. It says South Korea celebrates National Kimchi Day on November 22nd, representing the 11 major ingredients and 22 health benefits of the dish. The states of California, Virginia, and Hawaii also recognize this day. The legislature intends to join these governments by recognizing November 22nd of each year as Kimchi Day.
Wow.
So there's that.
Maybe that's something they can all agree on.
What do I even say about that? It's like, what were the dumb bills last year? The banning octopus farming when we don't even octopus farm in the state of Washington. There's always the one to, a statewide dinosaur.
Oh, yeah.
They're also running another bill this year to make officially Washington the evergreen state, which I thought it was. This is the level of waste and incompetence. And yes, it is waste. You might think, Brandi, it's harmless. It'll just run through and they'll make kimchi day and yay. Every minute spent on nonsense like this is just another reason why we need to reduce the size of government. You should absolutely have no time, energy, interest in exploring stupid stuff like that. Tells me that, like, I don't even think we need you to have a job. Maybe we reduce the number of state lawmakers. If they have so much time to be introducing bills to make a statewide kimchi day. And I've said, what is the proposal that, honestly, this would fix so much in Olympia? You limit the number of bills that someone can be the primary sponsor on. So you can only, I really think, you can only be the primary sponsor on 2 bills, and you can be a co-sponsor on, let's say, 5 or 10. That's it. Then they have to actually pick and choose what laws are worthy of introducing. Because we get, oh my God, we get hundreds, if not nearing 1,000 new proposed laws every session. You really think at this point in our state that there are 1,000 new laws that we need to put on the books? It's insane. They just come up with laws and proposals for the sake of it. Oh, I was sent to Olympia, so I got to think of something, kimchi day. Oh, kimchi day. It's like, oh my God, how embarrassing is that? How embarrassed would you be if you donated money to Representative Ryu's campaign? Like, I donated money to your campaign so you could go to Olympia and craft a bill to make a kimchi day? It's just crazy. So whenever I talk about kind of the dumbest bills heading into the legislative session, I used to include Republican bills that are dumb because they have no chance of passing. Like, for instance, they'll, in previous sessions, introduce abortion restrictions. it's like, well, not only is that dumb because it has no chance of passing, it's not even going to get a hearing, but it just feeds into the left's narrative that you're a threat to abortion rights. So I always think whenever those are introduced, and I'm sure there'll be some introduced this year, that's just dumb and destructive and counterproductive. Now, there are a couple that have been introduced, I think both of them by State Senator Phil Fortunato, who's a Republican, that I think previous Brandi, old Brandi, would put in that waste of time category. But I kind of feel different this year. I kind of feel different. I'll explain why. So one of them that Phil Fortunato has introduced, pre-filed Senate Bill 5002, an act relating to federal immigration enforcement. So it basically says the legislature recognizes the state's policy interest in protecting immigrant communities and cooperating and assisting the federal government in the enforcement of federal immigration laws, blah, blah, blah. And it goes on to ban sanctuary policies. So the purpose of Senate Bill 5002 is to ban sanctuary policies. So Washington couldn't be a sanctuary state. Now, that's not going to get a hearing. It's not going to go anywhere. But the reason I feel differently about it now is I really feel like the Democratic Party has gone so far to the fringe and some of these things are so disastrous that I would like to see them on the record, voting against something like that. Or at the very least, I'd like to see the committee chairs have to say it's not getting a hearing. Because then, in my mind, you are owning the consequences of our sanctuary policies. So Republicans, in this case, they know that's not going anywhere, but they're going to float the trial balloon, and a Democrat on whatever committee that would go to, I don't know if that would be the Public Safety Committee, probably not, they'll have to say it's not getting a hearing. So now they're essentially de facto owning the consequences of our state's immigration policy. So in this case, I've come to the realization that bills like this, I think, are necessary to essentially put the Democratic Party on the record. Senator Phil Fortunato had another one that, again, it's not going to get a hearing, but this, I think, more than any other, is worthy of getting Democrats on the record on. It's basically Senate Bill 5012, and it has to do with an act relating to the organization of interscholastic activities, and it talks about dudes can't play against chicks. Literally, you have to have the same sex chromosomes to compete against one another in sports. In state-sanctioned sports. Now, this one maybe would get a hearing. If you can have some people like some of the student athletes, that we've talked about on this show, stand up and talk to their lawmakers and say, will you at least give this a hearing so you can hear? Maybe they'd be willing to do it at that point, but it's never going to pass. Never going to pass, but either way, you now get Democrats on the record in some form or fashion saying, no, we think dudes should be able to compete against chicks. And there's something very brilliant about that maybe in the past I haven't appreciated. Senator Fortunato and some of the bills that he floats. I still feel the same way about the abortion stuff. That's just stupid and counterproductive. Maybe in 2 years I'll feel differently. I don't know. I'm just all over the place. But this is necessary. It's time. It's time to have that debate specifically in Olympia to let some of these athletes come and testify in front of a committee. I can think of one in particular, Annalee, who would be an absolutely excellent witness, so to speak, to talk to the legislature about her experience losing to a boy. And at some point, the tide will turn on this issue. I actually don't think it's going to be very long before the tide turns on this issue and also transgender surgeries for minors. And so I want to make sure that I'm on the right side of that, even though, on the surgery front, I've come to the right side, I think, fairly recently. But Democrats, they need to own their position on that. They need to own the destruction that position causes for young people in our state. And so kudos to Senator Fortunato for introducing that, and we'll see where it goes. So we will be tracking pre-filed bills. It's very easy. Just if you want to track them too, you can just Google pre-filed bills Olympia, and the page will come up, and you can see everything as it comes in. And one of the most effective ways we've found in previous legislative sessions is if there's a really bad bill, to get attention to it immediately before it has time to gain momentum and then it's unstoppable. We did that they wanted to reduce the punishment for drive-by shooters who kill someone. By the time we were done with it, I went on air on Christmas Eve and talked about it, and it was DOA by the time the legislative session began. So there's certainly opportunities if you see things, and you guys have in the past, alert us to, hey, did you see what was filed? I think it was Daniel, one of our subscribers, who on Christmas Eve let me know about that drive-by shooting bill, and we were able to jump on it. And so if you see something, please let us know. But kimchi day, look, I like kimchi, love it, think it's delicious and healthy and wonderful for my tummy. Doesn't need a day. Doesn't need a day. I will never recognize November 22nd as Washington Kimchi Day. Not going to do it.
What happens when it falls on Thanksgiving?
Oh, would that ever be? Well, it could be.
Could
In
be.
theory. So then is it Thanksgiving and Kimchi Day, and we're all going to be forced by the government to serve kimchi at our Thanksgiving under threat of arrest?
Or all of the places you get kimchi are closed, and so how are you going to celebrate?
Is there actually a lot of Asian restaurants stay open on Thanksgiving? Did you ever
They
notice
do.
that?
Yeah. Well, I'd say that and Christmas.
Yeah. Is there any single food, before I continue, that you would be in support of having a national blank day?
Well, my favorite is pho. I love pho.
You do love pho.
So that would probably be near the
National
top.
Pho Day.
Maybe some mac and cheese.
Mine would be a national mashed potato day.
Yeah,
That's
that would be a
kind of
good one.
Thanksgiving and Christmas. I'd celebrate. Anyway, kimchi, not so much. Okay, I have encouraged you guys to take the First Mark Challenge. We all need insurance. You might even need insurance that you don't even know you need. We talked to someone yesterday who, we shared their story, who got pet insurance through First Mark and ended up saving them $100 a month on their pet insurance for their service animal. So who knows? I mean, I had to get insurance for my business that I never even imagined I'd have to get, and I got it through First Mark, and it was really eye-opening, and they walked me through every step of the process. We hear so many stories from undivided viewers and listeners who've taken the First Mark Challenge and ended up saving hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a year. And who can't use a few thousand extra dollars a year, people? I mean, unless you're independently wealthy, and if that's the case, then you should be a presidential patron of Undivided if you've got that much money to throw around. Michelle says, thank you for recommending First Mark Insurance. I kept mentioning it to my husband, but he wasn't ready to look into it. We got our renewal with our existing provider for the next 6 months. It went from $3,000 to $8,000. I promptly reminded him about First Mark. We worked with Brad, and he saved us more than 50%. We can now continue our discussions about getting a travel trailer. Yeah, that is an example of why you should take the First Mark Challenge and why you should always listen to your wife, because wives know best. FirstMarkInsurance.com, FirstMarkInsurance.com. The very best part is they work for you. Okay, some national news. A lot of stuff I love in national news today. Good job, Nicole. So Eric Adams, we've been giving Eric Adams a lot of compliments for what he's been saying about the city's crime crisis. He stuck up for Daniel Penny when it was very, touchy for him to do so, and still is, I would argue, in the city of New York. And now BLM is lashing out against him because they support black people, but only if they're not only if they agree with them, right? So it's just ridiculous. But so Eric Adams, and we've been talking about everything he's been saying. He's willing to work with the Trump administration on immigration, all this stuff. Now I'm getting suspicious. Now I'm suspicious of Eric Adams, because now it's sounding a little bit too much like all of this is because he's gunning for a pardon from Donald Trump. Here's the latest clip.
And now we're hearing others are saying that Biden should pardon people because this would be difficult on their families and difficult on them, and they would have to pay high legal fees. Well, what about me? What about those mothers who are placed on FBI watch lists because they were standing up for their children?
Well, you said the other day you think that the justice system has been politicized. You believe that, don't you?
Yes, I do, with all my heart. But not only do I believe it, the president stated it. Donald Trump stated it. And countless others. You should look at some of these stories, what happened to people that stand up because of what they believe in. I believed in this city. We were going in the wrong direction with the migrants and asylum seekers. And I was very clear about that after 10 trips to Washington, D.C. I know what this crisis has done to our city long term. And New Yorkers are going to see the byproduct of $6.4 billion removed from our coffers.
So given the fact that you think it's been politicized, there's some people who think that President Trump might move to pardon some of the people who were involved in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Do you think that's something he should do because it's been politicized, or he should not do?
I think that's the determination of the president. I believe it's imperative that we seek justice in our country.
Doesn't it seem like he's trying to get a pardon from Donald Trump? Because his is a federal case.
Well, I definitely think he wants to be on his good side, which more power to him.
Well,
get what you want.
I believe that he believes what he's saying, because he's been slowly over time, especially on the immigrant crisis and what's happening in his city. But I feel like, coming to the defense of Daniel Penny and like all these things and how vocal he is. One, he probably feels like he has nothing to lose. I mean, the Dems already are like going after him federally. But two, like Donald Trump might be, if he's willing to hand out all these pardons, and if Eric Adams is sort of like, I think he's got a plan.
Keep it up.
I mean, I totally I like the guy. I just think now there's a plan involved where he's going all in, hoping for a pardon from Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So maybe that should be my show.
Yeah,
poll tomorrow. All right, speaking of New York and why Eric Adams stands out so much there with everything he's saying, Governor Kathy Hochul held the weirdest press conference I may have ever seen, and that's saying a lot. It is so cringy, absolutely secondhand cringe from watching it. So her master plan to combat inflation, which we know doesn't work because Democrats just tried to combat inflation this way for 4 years, and it just made inflation worse. But her master plan is in her budget. She is proposing sending $300 to $500 checks to residents of New York to help them out with some of their living expenses, which that's not combating inflation. So she doesn't want to actually help inflation. She wants to gift them taxpayer funds to cover the costs associated with inflation, like higher priced goods. So she has this awkward press conference where she has all these people standing behind her with these signs saying, "Show me the money," which is just tacky. And then she does the big reveal of the massive checks that she would send to New Yorkers.
They will send you a check to buy your groceries for a month or whatever you want to spend it on. And if you're an individual earning up to $150,000 a year, it's $300. What does that look like? All right. How about that for individuals?
Oh my God.
Now, if you're filing jointly and you have a family, you need a little more, right? Families are expensive.
She is so
How
proud
about
of
this?
She's so proud.
$500. $500
This has to be an SNL skit.
for families earning less than $300,000, because I know life in New York City is expensive and your salaries may sound nice, but they don't go very far.
Oh my God. And also up to $300,000 if you're still struggling. And New York is expensive, but is $500 really going to make or break your budget if you're making $300,000 a year? Like, that'll help you with a couple trips to the grocery store. First of all, it's like monopoly money to them at this point. Like, oh, you get the unveiling of the fake checks. She is so proud of herself. She thinks this is the coolest thing she's ever done. And of course, she has her like staff in the audience, and they're like, oh, taking pictures. Is that not the cringiest press conference you've ever seen? It's worse than the Bill de Blasio eating French fries and hamburgers. Remember? What is with them bribing people with props? Remember Bill de Blasio during the pandemic? He's like, we're going to give you a free hamburger if you have vaccinated. That's what it was, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, eating just grotesquely on camera, trying to convince people that it's so good.
It is. I mean,
oh
if you're
my God.
$300,000 a year, you're making what, 20, like, what is that? 10, 15, I mean, probably like $15,000 a month.
Oh, you're making more than that.
Maybe $20,000 a month.
Like, you're clearing 20 grand a month. Yeah.
And $500, like, I don't.
That's what I'm saying.
No
is like
perspective. That's silly.
Yeah. Yes, $300,000 a year as a family, if you're living in New York City proper, actually is not that much money. I hate to put it that way.
Right, but she's talking to the whole state.
Right.
Which the rest of them are normal.
Yeah, so if you're living outside of New York and upstate New York, like, yeah, if you're making $300,000, you are living in a mansion.
Yeah,
like,
you're doing
you are
pretty
making
well.
a lot of money. So it's just weird how that works. There's no assessment of need, right? Do you need this? Apply for it or whatever it is. Just here's money from the taxpayers. But you're right, like $300 or $500 compared to somebody who makes $300,000, like, that's nothing.
Right.
It's also just so stupid. Just unveiling of these checks. Who puts this stuff together? Who puts it together and is like, we should do a press conference where you have these like big cardboard checks and one says 300 and you take it off like you're a goddamn magician. So, oh my God, it's so bad. These politicians are hilarious. They are hilarious.
They're funny.
Oh, it's like when Bob Ferguson did the chicken and tuna checks.
Right.
And he had this press conference where he had a check, and then he had a setup of chicken and tuna. And he even had cooked chicken drummies. Like someone had to cook chicken drummies and bring them to his press conference and put them on a plate so people know what chicken and tuna looks like. Like, dude, we know what chicken and tuna looks like. Why do you have to have a prop?
It's aesthetic,
Oh
you know?
my God. Gosh, it's a special kind of person that wants these
funny.
jobs. All right, let's go see what's happening in Tokyo. So not just national news, we're going international today. This is fascinating. So this from CNN. Tokyo government gives workers 4-day work week. The goal? To boost fertility and family time. They want people to do it more. They want to give you an extra day off so you can have sex more.
And to take care of the babies that come as a result.
Well, yeah, right. Of course. It says only 727,000 births were recorded last year in Tokyo, with the fertility rate, the number of children a woman has in her lifetime, dropping to a new low of 1.2. I always think it's funny when they make a person, 0.2. According to the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, for a population to remain stable, it needs a fertility rate of 2.1. So 2 babies in a hand. So I think this is fascinating because in the U.S., and Nicole and I were talking about this before the show, it's the opposite. It's like, oh, Trump's elected. Now we're going to
stop having babies,
sew up our lady parts and shave our hair off so we're completely undesirable. And I mean, we are 2 childbearing age women who don't have children, so we're probably contributing to society's slow decline in some way. But at the same time, like, I kind of love that Tokyo is like, we need our population to remain stable. We want to encourage women to have kids, so we're going to send them home. Mm-hmm. Can you send us home?
Well,
can we go back to the 50s where it was like totally not cool for women to work? Because I'm ready. That's fine.
That's fine.
Would you not be fine with that?
No, I'd probably be fine. Well, assuming I had some man to go home to.
Right. Assuming you had a man to go home to.
But it's funny because Elon Musk has been saying that for years.
Yes.
And everybody gives him shit about it. So it's like, well, here you say what is necessary. This affects the economy. The fact that our birth rate is so low and nobody's having babies anymore and everybody's dumb. Elon says that, and they're all like, oh, that guy.
Yeah.
What a jerk.
He's got like children with 19 different women.
He's a chauvinist pig for saying that, right? Because women have to have babies and, whatever. Yeah. And and then here's Tokyo. Like, we'll give you a day off. Yeah. Like, please go have babies.
It was funny. Matt says, Project 1955. My cup of tea, new meaning to Freaky Friday. And then Jason asked, well, what do you guys do on Fridays? Oh, it's none of your business. I'm not here. Oh, just
looking for
funny.
A boyfriend. That's all.
Baron of Grey Matter says, you don't need to work, you two. Yeah, I do need to work, actually. We've kind of built our lives around a 2-income household.
Who's going to feed my cats?
So, yeah, Nicole's got cats to feed. I mean, at this point, we're just sort of in it. I always joke with my husband, though. I say, can I be a stay-at-home dog mom yet? He's like, no. I was like, okay. Oh my God, too much. Getting there. Okay, what am I doing? What am I missing? Oh, daily subscriber show poll. So going back to the top of our show, this idea of a wealth tax. So literally taxing people on unrealized capital gains, unrealized wealth is insane. Because anyway, I could get into this. We should talk about this more on the show. But if you have most of your wealth that's in those assets that are unrealized and you get taxed on it, aren't you going to have to sell some of it to pay the taxes on it if you don't have that much in like actual assets, like liquid hard money? That doesn't make any sense. So anyway, question for subscribers. Would you support additional taxes on Washington's wealthiest residents to close the state's looming budget deficit? Look, I think I know what the answer is going to be, but I asked anyway, just to see if any of you are feeling particularly anti-rich today. No, 98% of you say no, I would not support that. 2% said yes. Han said no because the rich will take their business and money elsewhere and we'll be left with nothing. And I think that's what Democrats can't get through their heads is like that economic activity brings in a lot of money to the state. So if you get rid of that economic opportunity and activity, you're going to end up in a budget deficit because that money you counted on is no longer going to be there. And you're not going to make as much money because not only is the economic activity going to leave, but the people are going to leave who you would have taxed with your wealth tax. So now you get nothing. It really doesn't take a very smart person to realize that. So it's hard to understand how we got ourselves into a situation where the majority of lawmakers in Olympia think that's a good idea. Michelle Hill, so because you make smart choices and aren't a lazy bum, you get to pay more for others? Sounds like we should all be lazy then, yeah? Mark, not just no, but hell no. Chris, work harder, you plebeian serfs. In addition to the thousands of lazy welfare bums and drug addicts depending on you, now there are thousands of illegals too. I really do think you'd have rich people who wouldn't push back as hard if the money was being spent well, and if the money was being spent on things that worked. I mean, I know I would be much more likely to approve new taxes that came to voters if all of our money was like, and our government was like running like a well-oiled machine, and our homeless crisis was solved and all these things. It's like, no, we give you so much money and you do nothing with it except fund laser hair removal for transgender inmates. All right, a couple more. Tina Marshall, what happens with losses incurred as a result of investing in stocks and bonds? I bet Washington won't offset that. Ridiculous. E said, we don't have a deficit. This happens every election cycle, started by Gregoire. It's pocket lining and people fall for it every time. Yeah, I mean, there's no way we should actually have a deficit because we have more money coming in than ever before. And some of the largest tax increases our state has ever put down happened in just the last few years. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in additional revenue coming in. And now all of a sudden we're broke. Suspicious. All right, one more. Amelia, mediocrity is what makes this country great. Socialism is what makes this state poor, literally. Or is it, wait, hold on. I think she said meritocracy. Okay, not mediocrity. Meritocracy is what makes this country great. Socialism is what makes this state poor, literally. All right. Before we get to questions, comments, and our closing sanity check from Taylor Lorenz, nutcase. Did you notice how the market responded right after the election? Is that something you're paying attention to? Probably. Is the person handling your investments and your retirement monitoring it? Well, they should be. If they're not, then it is time to get another perspective and another opinion when it comes to your hard-earned retirement. It's always smart to get a second opinion on things like a critical health care decision. So why would you not do the same when it comes to the health of your retirement portfolio? Chat with Zach Abraham, Chief Investment Officer at Bulwark Capital, and get that second opinion with Bulwark's free Know Your Risk portfolio review. So during that, they'll cover the impacts of the election. They'll give you an outlook for 2025, and they'll do a full reveal of how Bulwark is always looking for opportunities to lower risk, lower cost, and give you as much upside as possible. You only get one retirement. Get a second opinion. Don't put it off. Schedule your free portfolio review now at knowyourriskradio.com. That's knowyourriskradio.com. Okay. Ooh, some super chats today. Love that. Bill Biz, $20 super chat. Our super chat daddy. While the... I was like, stop calling him that. Why not? While the penny verdict is great news, the conduct of the judge and prosecutors in attempting to engineer a guilty verdict is malicious and despicable. They need to be held legally accountable. I agree. Malicious prosecution. Nightwolf, will they cover our unrealized losses? Screw this frickin' state. Krista, soulless, narcissistic, selfish, disgusting behavior. That could apply to a few of the stories we discussed today. Oh, Chad Rose, that's what they want. They want us to say yes to an income tax. And even if they did agree to get rid of the other taxes in order to impose the income tax, they would just turn around the very next cycle and hit us with more new taxes, and it would never stop, 100%. So that's why, in theory, would an income tax, trading all these things for an income tax, be a better idea? Probably. But I'll never trust them to do it in the way they promised to do it. Never in a million years. So hell no. Baron of Gray Matter, I will pay my property taxes from my unrealized gains then. It is insane, and you lefties who voted for this are at fault. Wake the heck up. Will this affect everyone's 401ks and retirement? I would imagine that if you've got
I
money
think that's what people
stock, right,
are saying. There's no real clear no on that. And so for
it seems like it would, unless
one
you're
year you have
it.
these gains, you'd have to pay on that, but then those gains go away the next year. You're not getting that money back. So that's where I think people
it doesn't
are
make
really
any sense.
Outraged by it.
It's a horrible idea. Sandy W, I love the idea of limiting the number of bills a legislator can bring forth or sponsor. I love it too. Isn't that a great idea? Whoever came up with that is a genius. Greg, get rid of the DEI programs. Boom, there's your $10 billion budget deficit solved. Also, we get Sanity back. Now, I don't think it accounts for $10 billion, but it's not a small chunk of change. So Anna B, oh my God, you calling Inslee out at that live debate with Culp was glorious. I was yelling at the TV to get him. It's a shame he still ended up winning. Yeah, that was a funny debate because it was the last debate I did as a mainstream reporter, but also those debates that the coalition holds are so strictly timed. You're like really not given time to ask follow-up. So I was kind of like breaking our internal rules by asking Inslee a follow-up because I'm like, I can't just let it go that he's saying that he knew about CHOP. Like, I can't just let that go. I got to ask a follow-up. So it was like, oh my God, they're probably going to yell at me for like spending time on this. But I was like, I got to do it.
Yeah. I like how he's like, well, I knew about it, but I'm not going to say that when I said that I knew about it, even though I just said I knew about it.
Well, then he's like, I don't remember the quote. And I'm like, I do. Thank you. Yes.
We all have it memorized.
Oh my God. Crafty Grandma Crispy, it would have been better to show the amount of groceries that can be bought with that money. Yeah. If you're going to have a prop, right, instead of the stupid $500 check, show like a table full of groceries. Here's what you could buy with that $500. Right. It's still a bad idea. And it's still just a bribe with taxpayer funds that doesn't actually do anything meaningful, and it doesn't combat inflation. But yeah, some sort of better.
Someone else had to take the tax off of some of the groceries or whatever it is. So actually make a difference in everybody.
A tax holiday.
Make it fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's Florida does a lot of different tax holidays where it's like, hey, for this day or that day, you've got a total holiday from the sales tax. Right. Enjoy. And people go out, they get a bunch of stuff they either need or just wanted. So that's something that you can do that's actually like not just dishing out taxpayer money to other taxpayers.
Whether they need it or not.
Like the tuna checks, just ridiculous. So good comments per the usual. You guys are so smart and insightful. All right, with that, let's get to our closing sanity check. All right, so you guys will remember Loopy Taylor Lorenz, who was previously a columnist for the Washington Post. She wrote about like social media trends like millennials and stuff like that. And she'd always have just insane takes in the Washington Post. Well, she ended up leaving that job. She's now kind of doing independent things and she's gone fully off a rocker. So maybe these are things she thought to herself when she was employed by the Washington Post, but obviously didn't say out loud because it would have got her fired even from the Washington Post. But for instance, she was outright celebrating the murder of that healthcare CEO in New York. Tweeting things, or Blue Sky. She uses Blue Sky, of course, which is like the liberal version of X. Where, oh, no wonder we want these healthcare CEOs dead. And she was talking about, all the terrible things they do to people in non-coverage or whatever it is. So anyway, she was on with Piers Morgan on a panel, and he asked her about her comments.
I do believe in the sanctity of life. And I think that's why I felt, along with so many other Americans, joy, unfortunately, because it feels like...
Serious?
I mean...
Joy in a man's execution?
Maybe not joy, but certainly not empathy.
This guy's a husband, he's a father, and he's being gunned down in the middle of Manhattan. Why does that make you joyful?
Of Americans that be murdered. So are the tens of thousands of Americans, innocent Americans, who died because greedy health insurance executives like this one push policies of denying care to the most vulnerable people.
So should they all be killed then? Should they all be killed, these healthcare executives? Would that make you even more joyful?
No, that would not.
Well, why not?
And,
why are you laughing?
I think because it wouldn't fix the
You seem to find the whole thing hilarious.
I find your question funny.
A bloke's been murdered in the street. I don't find it funny at all.
I don't find it funny that tens of thousands of Americans die every year and because they are denied life-saving health care from people like the CEO.
The loving and tolerant left is at it again, Piers.
Yeah, Taylor, I don't mean to be rude, but why the f*** are you laughing all the time? I don't get it. Sorry, apologies for my language, but honestly, I find it unbelievable. What are you laughing at?
Piers, I am laughing at Tommy's insane mischaracterization. These people are being killed by our barbaric and evil for-profit healthcare system. And I agree, we should not necessarily go around shooting people in the street.
Not necessarily. We shouldn't necessarily go around shooting people in the streets. Taylor Lorenz is a nutcase, and she shouldn't be getting any airtime on any sort of news platform. Although, kudos to Piers Morgan for calling her out in the way that she needed to be called out. Insane. That has been our sanity check for today. That has been today's episode of Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming home. Back. What? Oh, yes. Give the gift of Undivided this holiday season. Nicole's looking at me. I get to the end of the show, I'm hopped up on coffee, and I just forget things. You can give the gift of undivided this holiday season, common sense. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Patreon.com/undivided/gift. Might I recommend giving the gift of undivided to, I don't know, a Seattle progressive who thinks there's nothing at all wrong with the homeless crisis? Might I recommend, I don't know, giving the gift of undivided to your mother who voted for Kamala Harris and thinks Donald Trump is an existential threat to our democracy? Just a few gift ideas for you. That has been today's episode of Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. Let's see, housekeeping, I don't think so. If you haven't subscribed to support our show, we would sure love for you to do that. undividedpod.com. undividedpod.com. It's just $5 a month. I think that's a pretty sweet deal. We'll see you back here on the live show tomorrow at noon.